going on, Saints fans? Ross Jackson here with Canal Street Chronicles, and welcome back to another edition of our What Just Happened series here on YouTube. And we find ourselves asking once again, what just happened to the New Orleans Saints? I don't think it's really that drastic, but let's talk it out. Let's talk a little bit about what went on in this game. As always, we ask that you like and subscribe to the channel here. And of course, drop your thoughts of the game down below. I know we got some great responses to the Raiders loss, so I'm looking forward to seeing what the thoughts are around this Packers loss. But look, the Saints dropped this game 30-37. I think that I mentioned before that the Week 3 game for the New Orleans Saints was just as much about the Week 3 Saints being better than the Week 2 Saints as it was about the Saints being better than the Packers. And at least we can say that we did see that, at least in my opinion. We did see some improvements for the Saints. However, my number one concern continues at this point to be the defense. And then, of course, the lack of ability to push the ball down the field. Again, I'm a little bit less concerned about the deep ball in particular, but seeing the Saints struggle in the places where they're usually very efficient is something that, of course, stands out quite a bit. But it was good to see some of these players get involved. Obviously, Alvin Kamara had a remarkable game. 6 rushes, 58 yards, 13 catches for 136 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. He now has 3 receiving touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns to open up the season over the course of the first 3 games. He's only the second player in NFL history to achieve that. He had 197 total scrimmage yards this game, only 16 fewer than the scrimmage yards that were built around by the rest of the team. He had 197, the rest of the team 213. So, Alvin Kamara putting in a lot of work, putting the team on his back, but unfortunately just not enough. Over on the defensive side in particular, you look at the 72-yard pass to Allen Lazard, the big 48-yard pass to Allen Lazard, him getting behind Marshawn Lattimore the first time for 48 yards, getting behind PJ Williams, who was playing. We heard all that talk about how great PJ was as a safety, and then we get him in there as a quarter safety responsibility and 72 yards. So there's that. But look, when you look at this game, the defense faltered. The penalties continued, 8 penalties for 83 more yards. These penalties were, some of them questionable. Obviously, the phantom horse collar tackle on Malcolm Jenkins was a load. And then you also saw some plays that were just mental lapses. You know, the Saints within 3 points in the fourth quarter on a 3rd down and 3 on the Green Bay 18. And then you get drawn off sides by a hard count in an empty stadium. And then on the same play, you commit a pass interference penalty in the end zone. Janoris Jenkins for the second week in a row doing that late in the game where the Saints were within a single score and then ended up extending drives because of a defensive pass interference penalty by Jenkins that ended up resulting in the team then going down 2 scores, both situations leading to them being down by 10 points. So not advantageous enough, really, and just not good for the Saints and these penalties. Discipline early on in the season is something that we're used to seeing the Saints struggle with. Usually, though, it's on the offensive line and the defense. So I guess there's some positivity in that it's mostly the defense this time and not as much the offensive line. But still, you want to see that discipline get better. Look, they're second in the NFL right now with 24 penalties. First place is, I believe, the Arizona Cardinals with 27, but they're first in the NFL with 331 penalty yards over the first 3 games, and they're first as well in defensive pass interference with 9 of those flags being thrown against them. This was the first time for the Saints this season that they've had 3 different 40-yard receivers, players with 40 or more receiving yards. So you saw the ball get spread out a little bit more. 8 players catching passes, 8 players targeted by Drew Brees, who went 29 of 36. That's 80.5% completion percentage, 288 yards and 3 touchdowns. Yet another 3 touchdown game for Drew Brees. But again, just not enough of a threat against defenses. I mean, they know exactly where the ball is going to go, even without Michael Thomas on the field. And certainly, Michael Thomas probably improves the play calling a little bit because you know that on a 2nd and 2, there's no reason to put Taysom Hill in. You just throw a quick pass to Michael Thomas, and then you get a guaranteed 4 to 5 yards out of that. But we'll talk about that again here in just a little bit. So this was another game that the Saints were in pretty late. I mean, they were tied at 27-27. Then they were only down by 3 points at one point. But again, that penalty in the end zone and then followed up by another penalty in the end zone after that really helped to solidify this win for the Green Bay Packers. So there were some positive things to take away from this game. As we mentioned, Alvin Kamara had a very nice day. There was some semblance of rhythm. I'm hesitant to just call it good rhythm for the Saints offense, but there were four straight scoring drives for the Saints. And then they also, Drew Brees during that time completed like 14 of 17 passes, but that all ended up getting disrupted once they ended up taking Drew Brees out of the game on a 2nd and 2 and then putting the ball in the hands of Taysom Hill. And look, I'm not a Taysom Hill hater at all. I just say that Taysom Hill's role is a role that hasn't really been present so far this year the way that we're used to seeing it. They've kind of reversed his role. Here's what I mean. In 2020 so far, 7 rushes for 27 yards, only 2 catches for 15 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 first down. You look at the first 3 games that Taysom played with a full, starting and playing all the way through Drew Brees. So that's the first week and then the Cardinals game and moving forward after that. During those 3 games, only 3 rushes for 19 yards, but 6 receptions for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. So the role for Taysom Hill has been a little bit different. We see him continuously in the backfield or under center, taking snaps with the intent of running the ball. We've seen 5 different times where he has lined up now at quarterback and run the ball, even though some of them were designed passes and he scrambled. You're not seeing him be effective over the middle, effective down the field as a receiver, catching him in stride so that he picks up all that steam and can run over players. He hasn't broken many tackles at all this season, if any, for that matter. And that's what we're used to seeing from him. But unfortunately, that's just not the role that we've seen him in so far. We're seeing him under center a lot more, or at least at quarterback a lot more. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily advantageous to the Saints, who are trying to get their offense some rhythm with Drew Brees at the helm. Speaking of rhythm, we did finally see a little bit of production from Emmanuel Sanders in this game. 4 catches, 56 yards, and a 10-yard touchdown to give the Saints the lead going into halftime. It's great to see that. Traquan Smith had another nice day, 4 catches for 42 yards, and then Jared Cook just not available during this game. 2 catches for 21 yards left after 21 plays with a groin injury. So the big issues for the Saints here, of course, they had the 4th quarter turnover with the fumble by Taysom Hill, the penalties, which we've already discussed at length and at nauseum at this point, and then also lack of deep coverage. This was the first real test for the Saints secondary against a quarterback that was going to be willing to go deep, had good deep ball accuracy, can push the ball down the field. Tom Brady's not doing that. Derek Carr's not doing that. Aaron Rodgers will do it all day. And it's exactly what you saw, or all night, I guess you should say. And that's definitely what you saw, and the Saints struggled against that, while also still struggling against tight ends. We gave Darren Waller a lot of the credit last week because Darren Waller is probably the 3rd best tight end in the NFL. But now you saw these other players, Jay Sternberger and a couple of other, Mercedes Lewis, and then I can't even remember the other tight end's name for the Green Bay Packers, but you saw them come up with these big plays all throughout the game, being left alone in coverage near the sideline, being left alone at the goal line, pretty much the exact same play that the Las Vegas Raiders ran against the Saints to get a touchdown at the goal line. I mean, so if you're struggling against tight ends close to the line of scrimmage, struggling against tight ends in the intermediate area, and then also giving up the deep ball to Allen Lazard, who had over 140 receiving yards in this game, where's the defense? What are you going to do with all of this? And then you also have a lack of consistent rhythm over on the offensive side to combat that, and then compound that with a lack of consistent rhythm on the defensive line as well, which, look, they have some injuries that we should talk about as well. Marcus Davenport was out in this game, 3rd straight game. You thought that he wasn't going to miss this much because they didn't put him on injured reserve, which is now a 3-week minimum. You would imagine that if they thought he was going to miss that much time, that they would have put him on injured reserve and then taken him off. But obviously, he misses 3 games. Coach Payton did say that he hopes to have Marcus Davenport back against Detroit, so we'll see what happens. The Saints also were without David Onyemata, who missed this game with a groin injury. He popped up on the injury report on Friday, was questionable for the game, ended up being inactive for this one as well. Andrus Peat injured again. Save that one for the comments, I guess, if you want to dive in about that. But injured again, not his fault. I mean, somebody rolled. It's essentially the exact same thing that happened to Michael Thomas. There was a tackle. He was trying to keep moving his feet down the field. He was blocking, but unfortunately just couldn't get out from under somebody that rolled over on top of his ankle. So that's a suspected high ankle sprain. We'll learn more about that in the coming days. And then, as I mentioned, Jared Cook left with a groin injury, and you'll see, I mean, you just have to keep an eye out on him when it comes to the injury report here over the week. So we mentioned the Saints defensive line, them not having Marcus Davenport or David Onyemata, but they still managed to fare really well against the run game. And it's actually kind of surprising. So they still haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher. They didn't allow 100 total rushing yards at all in this game. They're 6th in the NFL in rushing yards allowed amongst those that have already played 3 games, all while playing base defense with 3 linebackers on the field just 5 times so far in 2020. They did it 3 times against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to open up the season, twice this game on the goal line, the one to where they gave up the pretty much the exact same Darren Waller touchdown play to the tight end. I'm actually kind of surprised by this, considering how light the Saints have been going on defense, but you're seeing them perform well against the run despite how light and coverage heavy they are on defense and defensive back heavy they are on defense, but yet still struggling against coverage, where the secondary and pass rush were supposed to be the strengths of this team. And so far, you're just not seeing that. They were credited with 8 different pressures by Pro Football Focus in this game, but none of them really all that impactful with the exception of the Demario Davis sack. And that's unfortunately fully on display, as the Saints right now are 12th in passing yards allowed, or 12th most in passing yards allowed, and then also 2nd in terms of passing touchdowns allowed with 8. So we'll do as we always do here. We'll go over some top performers. Not a ton of names to go over on this list that we haven't talked about already. Alvin Kamara, who we've already talked about, insane day, 197 total yards or scrimmage yards in this game, 2 touchdowns from scrimmage as well. Demario Davis had a really fantastic game. He played okay in coverage, played about what you would expect from him in coverage, but also had some nice pressures, a couple of great plays in the run game, and then of course the sack as well, the lone sack for the Saints defense. Somebody who you might not expect to be on this list, particularly after giving up a touchdown to Mercedes Lewis and of course his performance last week, but Malcolm Jenkins had a really, really good game, just in terms of being the one guy on the Saints defense that looked like he understood what it was that Matt LaFleur's system was trying to do. He took away a couple of routes. He made some big plays in the run game as well, including the 4th and 1 stop on Aaron Jones. That was essentially the Saints' lone turnover that they forced in the game, which was a turnover on downs that unfortunately they couldn't capitalize on because they ended up turning the ball over just 2 plays later with the fumble. But a fantastic game from Malcolm Jenkins. I'm going to work to break him down this week in terms of what he did in this game, because there's a lot of stuff that's not going to show up in the stat sheet, but he played really, really well and showed you exactly why it is that the Saints went and got him, because there's just not a lot that he hasn't seen on the field. And so his bounce back game this week was actually pretty remarkable and pretty outstanding. And then lastly, I'll throw in a nod to Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz, neither of them allowing any pressures in this game. Cesar Ruiz ended up coming in with 10 minutes and 32 seconds left in the second quarter, a full 10 minutes before the Andrus Peat injury, as we mentioned. So the Saints got him out there because they wanted him out there, as opposed to him being a necessity along the offensive line. So it was good to see him get involved, and the coaching staff essentially give him a nod and say, hey, we're ready for you to play now. So he went out there and played 51 snaps and played pretty well, particularly in the passing game. And then Eric McCoy, just what else can you say? The guy got up to over 16 miles an hour as an offensive lineman, 300 plus pounds running at you at 16 miles an hour is just insane. Paved the way for Alvin Kamara, just an outstanding play. And then, of course, also Josh Hill and Marquez Callaway deserve some credit there too, blocking downfield near the goal line to help for the final push to get Alvin Kamara in there on the 52-yard catch and run. The big question marks this week, Cam Jordan, he's going to grade well because he had 2 pressures on his snaps, but he otherwise had 4 tackles and was kind of, I don't want to say that he wasn't effective. It's just that he didn't have the impact plays we're accustomed to seeing from him. I don't know if it's still that offseason surgery and injury that is maybe bothering him, or if it's just Marcus Davenport means that much to the defensive line. It means that much to have 2 threats at defensive end as opposed to just 1 on the edge. But he also, got chipped a lot. He got doubled a lot, but he also got handled by Mercedes Lewis a couple of times, the tight end as well, who of course is one of the better blocking tight ends in the NFL. But I don't know what it is. I'm not a doctor. And if I was, I certainly wouldn't be good enough to be Cam Jordan's doctor. So we'll see if he ends up turning it on, but certainly he's a big question mark at the moment. Marshawn Lattimore was targeted 4 times, allowed 4 catches, 83 yards, and a touchdown, including a perfect passer rating. And then PJ Williams, like I mentioned, all that talk in the offseason about how great a safety he was looking like he was turning into. And then you saw him give up a 72-yard catch to Allen Lazard. And I'm sure there's probably some ownership in terms of passing him off through zones. He was playing quarters coverage, but it didn't seem like there was another defender there for him to pass the ball off to. I'm not really sure. I'll have to see it once we get the all 22, but still not a great showing for the guy who only had a handful of snaps in this game. And in the wrap up here, just some interesting notes. Cam Jordan was only in on 77% of snaps. We saw Benny Fowler get a good amount of snaps. He was recently signed to the Saints active roster. They signed him as well as Marcus Hunt to the active roster after bringing them up from the practice squad for the limit that you can do in this COVID season so far. So Benny Fowler got a lot of snaps in the red zone in place of Marquez Callaway as well as Deontay Harris, which makes sense. Go with the size, right? The guy's 6'3". He's got good speed. He's a good route runner. He has chemistry with Emmanuel Sanders. Makes a lot of sense, but cool to see him getting involved and being out there in his first game with the offense. And then Cesar Ruiz went in, like I mentioned, a little bit earlier than we might have expected him to go in. Once Nick Easton had the start, I kind of expected that it was just going to be Nick Easton's game, but then they ended up putting Cesar Ruiz in. So I was glad to see that. And it didn't look like Nick Easton did anything wrong in the play before. You know, the Saints are only credited with allowing 4 pressures in this game, 2 by Andrews Pete and 1 by each of the tackles, Teron Armstead and Ryan Ramczyk. So it didn't look like Nick Easton necessarily did anything wrong to lead to him, you know, them putting Cesar Ruiz in, which is good news. They simply just wanted to see Cesar Ruiz, so I was glad to see that. First round pick. Obviously, you want to see him out on the field as quickly as possible. Another draft pick, Adam Troutman, actually outsnapped Josh Hill in this game. So he was essentially your tight end 2 behind Jared Cook. However, once Jared Cook was out, you did see a big decline in large personnel. You saw a lot of 11 personnel in this game. Out of the 62 offensive plays that the Saints ran, the Saints had around 40 of them in 11 personnel, whether that included Taysom Hill or not. So you saw them really lean into 11 personnel for the first time this year, as opposed to mixing up the personnel groupings like you saw a lot. Of course, 21 of those came either in the 2-minute drives at the end of the first half, at the end of the game, or while they were trailing. Finally, the Saints do have 4 favorable matchups coming up with a bye week in between. Next up, they'll head to Detroit, but honestly, there's still a lot of ifs, and there are a lot of things to figure out ahead of their game as they travel to take on the Lions next week. So we'll be back with you next week with another edition of What Just Happened here on the Canal Street Chronicles YouTube page. We appreciate you for coming through. As always, we ask that you like and subscribe and drop your comments below, and we will holler at you next week.